Welcome back everyone, it's me Matt. Thank you so much for joining me today on this video. We're talking about off-roading vehicles, one of the newer lightweight tactical vehicles from the United States military, and I guess not so much new anymore, this has been around for some time, but I actually got to see one in person the other day when a convoy of US soldiers came through our local town, coming back from a training exercise in CFB Wainwright, which is actually where I've done a lot of my training. They did Maple Resolve there, and a Special Forces group were going back to their local town in Utah there, bringing a bunch of vehicles through, and one of these was one of the vehicles that came through, the JLTV, a particularly interesting off-roading vehicle that I'd like to talk a little bit about today. Now, it's safe to say there are only a few light vehicle designs that are really serving the United States Army for a long time, especially since World War II, and the Jeep really has set the standard for the longest time. And of course, North America does love its Jeeps. I personally own a Land Rover Defender from the UK. I do love it, and I think it's incredible, but really, Jeeps do hold their true value here because of their reputation and the service that they had in World War II. Of course, other military vehicles around the world have had the same kind of reputation, including that from the mid-1980s, the Humvee, or the high mobility multi-purpose vehicle, currently that of the primary US standard light utility vehicle, which has been phased out progressively in the last 5 or 6 years. We all know of this prestigious military vehicle and that all it's done through its time, and though different vehicles and variations of the Humvee have come through, it really is the basis of the light vehicle fleet of the United States military, and it's served well beyond its capabilities as a tactical light-wheeled vehicle for the US military, and it really has done extremely well for its dependability and for its numbers that it was produced in very high quantity. Its configurations, although changed, has come definitely to the end of its service life with different difficulties, especially when it came through to Iraq and Afghanistan and any environments that imposed IEDs. It was never really intended to provide ballistic protection for different passengers and all the cargo on board on the front lines of unconventional warfare with that of IEDs and counterinsurgency. The flat-based portion of the vehicle did not give it the full protection that the crew required, and going into such hostile areas as a result, Humvees really have been very, very vulnerable to these kind of attacks, and therefore have taken the brunt of the casualties when it comes to lightly armored wheeled vehicles. So much so that about 60% of the American vehicle deaths actually came from IEDs in that of Afghanistan and the Iraq War, and that's more than 3,000 dead and 33,000 wounded, many of which were unfortunately in Humvees. These totals really do demonstrate the inadequacy of something as light as the Humvee back in its day, and still to this day, and of course there's a lot of emphasis now on the protection against IEDs or improvised explosive devices and mines, where the mine-resistant ambush protected vehicle or MRAP vehicle was very much a compromise for this capability. But when you have something as heavily armoured that can withstand substantial IED attacks, you have a lot of loss of speed and manoeuvrability. And as you can see, like these Marines here that are trying to use more of a tactical scout capability, you are losing a lot of capacity there to be able to get vehicles fast and into a hotspot and back out again. The ability for these vehicles to have that stealthy approach is something you really want, and the bigger, heavier MRAP vehicles just couldn't quite do that because they were so cumbersome and gigantic with the heavy vehicle bouncing all over the place. The US military therefore had a bit of a predicament on their hands of how do they make a vehicle that is lightweight enough and tactical enough to be able to move quickly and agile across the battlefield, but also have just enough protection to provide against IEDs or counterinsurgency warfare. Both the Army and the Marine Corps of the US military really needed to look for a new tactical state-of-the-art replacement for the Humvee quickly, providing a total different variation of armor protection, high-speed counterinsurgency capabilities, and also for the ability to take on different weapon platforms and store enough equipment or supplies for it to survive over a prolonged period of time. This certainly was a very difficult challenge, and of course something that required A, a lot of money, B, a lot of different decisions to be made, and C, a bit of luck. And this is what brings us on to today's vehicle as the Joint Light Tactical Vehicle, or JLTV. In January 2006, the Department of Defense launched this platform to develop against the Humvee successor with its different protected mobility high-speed capabilities, and in all honesty, a very modernized vehicle that could keep up with the different types of threats that were coming up today, including that of IEDs, RPGs, and some of the heavier small arms fire that came out from things like the Dushka, or even potentially sniper fire. A new program had to come in very quickly, and although this program did have a lot of problems initially, as always with cost, it came to a lot of money to make these things, and the vehicle was quite pricey at the time at the initial stages of its design. Of course, when it comes to designing something that's technical, this is a very difficult requirement because there are so much different variations of what each department needs. The US military wanted the US Army and the US Marines to get along and figure out their requirements together, but by the end of 2006, the DoD approved the concept refinement phase of the program, followed by a technical development phase in 2008. 7 companies in consortium submitted different types of proposals, and the government selected 3 specific competitors in October 2008. These were Lockheed Martin, General Tactical Vehicles BAE Systems, or Navistar. Selection was very, very competitive for these vehicles. Interestingly though, one defense contractor known as Oshkosh was not actually initially selected. It did, however, give them the opportunity to work outside the manufacturing development contract phase and get involved a little bit later on, and refine some of their programs that they previously worked on in the past, including that of the MRAP design that they worked on and specialized on in some of the larger, heavier transport vehicles for the British forces and for other forces around the world. In August 2013, Oshkosh and 2 other contractors, Lockheed Martin and AM General, each delivered 22 vehicles for about a year's worth of testing and evaluation in different locations around the world, including very hostile climates, to train and develop the vehicle as to whether or not it was to be selected. The result of these final proposals in 2015, the government announced that Oshkosh Defense actually won the competition and asked for the JLTV to be involved in extensive testing for about 2 or 3 years from there. In essence, Oshkosh really had the subject matter expertise parallel to the other vehicles that they designed in the past, and this allowed them to really develop and hone in on what they really wanted to design, something that was lightweight, fast and capable, and also be able to rely upon different platforms and different specifications to both the US Marine Corps and the US Army to what exactly they wanted. They set themselves up for a really good position with a very mature platform that they could modify and integrate with some of the requirements they needed for the new tactical vehicle. And the outcome really gave the JLTV a much more better protected and more light capability to say some of the light tanks out there, or mine-resistant MRAPs that are just as more powerful. This is interesting because you're looking at something that's very fast and agile, but has the capacity to hold itself against, say, some light tanks. The speed and maneuverability suddenly became so much more notable though when they came on some of the more aggressive off-road platforms and testing that were actually used in the Baja racing. Surprisingly, the most basic terms, the Oshkosh offered much more protected mobility at a much better price to that of even some of the competitors that were trying to push even heavier duty vehicles out there that did still not provide the same level of protection at the cost of which Oshkosh was trying to do. Another big part of the requirement was they needed the fuel economy of these vehicles. When you're getting a big heavy vehicle, the engine that's pulling it around is going to chew through a lot of gas, and if you have something that can't actually get to where it needs to go because it runs out of gas before it gets there, well, it's kind of redundant. We all know the fuel consumption of the Humvees was extremely high, which literally drained the supply requirements for small tactical vehicles to push ahead of the forces that they were covering, which slowed down the battle group if they were required to do things like reconnaissance or resupply missions. The requirement of these vehicles in quantity is quite astonishing according to low-rate initial production contracts of over $114 million US. This was started over 2 years, and additionally to that, a 5-year full-rate production contract was awarded to $6.75 billion US, which was due in 2018. The total program value for all these vehicles being produced was $24 billion, which is an incredible amount of money, but when you're replacing an entire fleet, you have to think about the number of light vehicles that are required to replace the Humvees. It makes complete sense now that the operational requirements of these vehicles was quite specific. Of course, different variants and different types of vehicles were produced, but in the grand scheme of things, the basic platform, there is quite a large requirement for them. The Army needed 49,000 of these vehicles and the Marine called for about 6,000, and these totals don't really include the different derivatives of international scales, which of course vary between each order, and at the end of the day we're focusing just on the US military for today. They did have a very interesting development at first, and they came into production with a lot of different design variants and capabilities which were required, but not all of them came to fruition. Why is this? Well, there was just too much demand. There was too much that people were asking for in each branch of the military, both the US Marine Corps and the Army, and the designer from Oshkosh just couldn't quite keep up, which is why they wanted a more modular platform. And we talk more and more about this on my channel all the time. Platforms that can be changed out, take something off, put back on, something that can be completely removed and given a new module to turn it into a medical vehicle, an infantry carrier, or even potentially somewhat of an infantry fighting vehicle. But the JLTV wasn't really designed for that kind of setup. It was a custom platform that you would design, create the body and chassis for, buy it, and that was really what you get. You wouldn't really have a huge amount of change between what you could have on, say, a reconnaissance vehicle to that of just to transport troops. One of the things that really appealed to the JLTV is the fact the vehicle's frame rails and overall frame design is that of a unibody construction. This allows the vehicle to be quite cheap to produce. The vehicle uses traditional materials that reduce the cost significantly with very few composites. But it's truly the more tactical capability that's giving it its edge. The mobility and agility on the battlefield is some of the best off-road mobility out there, and from what people I've spoken to have used this vehicle, they absolutely love it in terms of its quality and ride quality to be able to go just about everywhere and anywhere with the adjustable high pressure gas spring shock absorbers, the 20-inch wheel travel, and allows it to basically float on air, and in essence you can adjust both the tyre pressures and suspension as you need to wherever you want it to go. The vehicle is very digitalized, which is very different to its predecessor, the Humvee, which is basically just straight mechanics. However, when you start putting digitalization on a vehicle, computers can start to go wrong. And there's been quite a number of discussions I've had with people that have used this vehicle in the past that have said that some of the software can just be quite confusing and also have quite a large error rate, which is really hard to decipher whether or not this is accurate or not with the people I've spoken to, and I've only spoken to about 2 or 3 different people, so maybe it's just a user error, I'm not sure. But they have said there has been some errors in the way in which the technology works with the computers on this system. So I can't really base an entire fleet of having problems from just a few people having issues with some software. However, some people have mentioned they can glitch out on some of the digital readouts, and for the most part the vehicle, however, does very well on what it needs to do, and they have never really had major issues when it does go off-road. The vehicle is also far more comfortable to ride with the men and women who do the fighting in this vehicle. The seats have been designed to fit the bulky body armor, backpacks and webbing that the soldiers now have to carry, and unlike the underpowered Humvee back in the day, one of the things that I can certainly attest to significantly in the desert is having a vehicle with air conditioning. My Warrior infantry fighting vehicle unfortunately did not have it in Afghanistan, and I can safely say it was very uncomfortable, but this really does have a very good full integrated air conditioning and has the suite that provides a lot more comfortability to those using it than it does in the previous Humvee system. It does have bullet resistant tyres and a very good capability in the sand. The tyres themselves are very good at going over rocks and, as I said, are adjustable in pressure. The vehicle can also go at quite high speeds. It can adjust its suspension to drive on highways or in convoy modes, which normally would have rattled the Humvee to pieces, which, a lot of people have said, yeah, it can drive on the highway, but the thing shakes itself to death almost. And this vehicle still is quite a monster in the grand scheme of things, designed to be driven purely off-road. However, when it does need to, it has the capacity to run up to 70 miles an hour, giving it that good convoy mode capability. It also has the ability to be very comfortable driving on the larger treads at high level, which means it can lower nice and low to the ground and not create a tipping hazard at high speeds, which can be very dangerous. I know those who have been using the the TAP V have had major issues with tipping hazards in the past here in Canada, and a lot of people have said that it is very high risk. But for the most part, it does exactly what it needs to do at high speeds, which is hug to the ground and not tip over. Another interesting feature of this vehicle is that in place of the sun visor mounted above the thick blast resistant windshield, the JLTV has a full down night vision driving system integrated to allow the full vehicle to drive without the need of night vision goggles. Both driver and commander can use this system. Mentioning more about its technology, the vehicle also can detect its own problems and can limit itself or shut itself down to avoid any damage to the digital safeguards that it has. However, those safeguards can actually potentially endanger the crew's lives, and therefore it does have an override switch that the driver can use to take control away from the computer if necessary. The soldiers so far that I've discussed about using it really do enjoy its capability. Although the love for the Humvees has been around for some time, a lot of people really did enjoy using them. Of course, a lot of them are still being used in the civilian world today and being pulled away from the fleet that is slowly degrading and going to the public. Unfortunately though, it's the fact that this vehicle was very much outshining every single capability of the Humvee, which in 2003, the version of the Humvees that still are being updated to this day were a very easy target for roadside bomb attacks, and the vehicles with their different shaped hulls really provided so much more capability with the JLTV. Interestingly enough though, the vehicles were so fast and capable when they first came out that the US military and the Pentagon were quite concerned about troops using these way beyond their normal capacity. The Pentagon was actually so worried that when they first released these vehicles, they thought the troops would drive them way too fast compared to their predecessors of the Humvees. Like a bucking bronco, when the first vehicles came out, there were a couple of incidences. In fact, they had good reason to worry, because after 72 hours, the 3rd Infantry Division at Fort Stewart, Georgia, someone actually managed to roll one of the trucks within the first 3 days of receiving it. And good thing that there's been no more major incidences since, but of course these are not Humvees, and therefore the troops have been given specific training about being careful of operating these things, as they are not like driving big gigantic flat wheel-based vehicles like Humvees that now have a high tipping angle if the suspension is set too high at travelling high speeds. In the grand scheme of things, this vehicle really has outshone the Humvee in its capability and capacity, and it's a great thing that they are starting to come into the full fleet of use of small, tactical, light vehicles for the US military. Of course, it does come at a high cost, but let's hope that these vehicles stay to the true testament of what the same as the Humvee did during its years of service, and potentially that of the Jeep. I'd love to hear your input on this vehicle, folks. Please leave me a like if you did enjoy the vehicles review, and also if you want to see more of my videos in the future, click the little bell by the subscribe button. Also, a big shout out and thank you to those who have been supporting my Patreon and onto PayPal for financial support to this channel. It really does mean a lot to me. I'm also now partnered up with a clothing brand known as Attire for Effect. They produce artillery themed clothing. Really cool website. Go check the link below. It's got some really good clothing. I bought a few myself and I really enjoy it, so go check them out. And thanks again for joining me, everyone, today. I hope to see you again next time. All the best. Bye bye.